The Unpaid Ledger. Season 2, Episode 3. The Arrangement. This is what I found out later, in the order it happened. The dig site sat on the east side of Ashford, 3 blocks north of the rail yard. The lot had been a foundry from 1923 through the late 70s, and then a parking lot for nobody in particular for 40 years after that. The foundry had been demolished down to the slab in 2002, and the slab broken up and hauled out in 2019 when a development group bought the parcel cheap. The group sat on it waiting for interest rates to do something they liked, and was still waiting when they finally broke ground in September on a mixed-use project the city had been promising the east side for about a decade. The excavation was 3 weeks in when they hit it. The crew was 6 men and 1 supervisor. They were running a John Deere 870G with a hydraulic breaker attachment on a foundation trench that was supposed to go down 18 feet. At roughly 14 feet, on a Tuesday morning in early October, the breaker hit something that wasn't on any survey and wasn't in any of the municipal records going back to the foundry's original 1923 build permit. The operator felt it through the cab, harder than rebar, different density than stone, and shut the machine down. The supervisor, a woman named Cora Vass, came over to look. What they'd found initially was nothing. A seam in the soil that shouldn't have been there. A line of darker earth against the lighter clay, running in an arc that didn't match any natural geological feature. Vass marked it and called the city archaeologist because that's what the permit required. The archaeologist didn't get there in time. At 10:47 that morning, the time was documented because Vass documented everything. The compasses on every piece of equipment on the site started reading north as a different direction depending on where you were standing. Battery-powered tools began draining in minutes. The site radio, which had been playing a classic rock station at low volume from a speaker clipped to the trailer, started picking up something that wasn't the station anymore. Vass wrote in her log, "Equipment unreliable, static on-site radio, not weather," and she called it in to Jameson at 10:52. At 11:15, a worker named Daniel Osei walked toward the trench. Vass's log is specific about this. He wasn't running, and he wasn't even moving quickly. He set down the rebar he was carrying, stepped over the safety line, and walked to the edge of the 14-foot trench with the unhurried pace of a man who'd heard someone call his name from the other room. The 4 men closest to him saw him do it, and 2 of them called after him, and he didn't respond. He went over the edge and into the trench, and by the time the closest man got to the edge behind him, there was nothing in the trench to recover. 2 more followed over the next 4 hours, one at 12:03, one at 2:41. Neither of them had a reason to be in the trench either. Neither of them had heard anything the remaining crew could hear. By the time Vass locked the site down and started making the kinds of calls that don't go to the city, it had been 6 hours and 3 people were missing. Those calls eventually reached Marcus, and Marcus called me. I was at my desk when the phone rang. 6:40 in the evening. The light already going flat against the window, and I'd been reading through the Hargrove file for the 3rd time since Monday. Hargrove had been handled yesterday afternoon. I'd driven out to his house in the South Corridor, introduced myself as a home visit from his former employer's benefits program, which he'd accepted because he was sick enough to accept anything that looked like help. I'd cleared 8 months of accumulated medical cost off him in roughly 19 minutes of careful work. He'd slept through it, which was how I preferred those to go when the target didn't know he was a target. He'd woken up feeling, in his own words, a little better than he had in a while. I'd thanked him for his time and left. The 3 days on Leland's folded sheet had turned out to be 2. So the file on my desk was closed. I was reading it again because I wanted to understand what Rhodes had done to build the placement in the first place, the shape of it, the attachments, the way the cost cluster had been structured to avoid detection for 8 months. It was good work, and I'll say what I mean. Careful, ugly, good work. The kind of craftsmanship you could admire even while you were dismantling it. The phone rang, and it was Marcus. "Young man," he said. "You're wanted." "By who?" "By a problem." A pause on his end, the kind of pause Marcus did when he was deciding how much of what he knew to deliver first. "Construction site on the east side. 3 people gone in 6 hours, and the site supervisor called a contact of mine. The contact of a contact called me because she knows what the descriptions sound like, and she knows I know what the descriptions sound like." "What do the descriptions sound like?" "They sound like the site hit something it wasn't supposed to find," Marcus said. I closed the Hargrove file. "Give me the address." He gave me the address. I wrote it down, put on my coat, and was at the door before Eddie had finished the slow arrangement of himself that he did when he was deciding he was ready to leave. In the passenger seat of the Taurus, as I pulled out of the lot, he said he hoped I wasn't planning to eat dinner anytime soon. I asked him why. "Because," he said, "that wasn't the voice Marcus uses when he's giving you an ordinary case, and I'd rather not be inside your head when the food doesn't agree with whatever this turns out to be." The east side was 12 minutes in traffic, but I did it in 10. Chapter 2. The Breach. The site was chain-link, floodlit, and quiet in the wrong way. I could feel it from 2 blocks out, not the way I could feel a placement. A placement was localized, specific, addressed to a person and sitting where the person was. This was ambient, the kind of pressure a storm front puts on the side of your head before the weather changes. Only the storm wasn't weather and it wasn't going anywhere. The whole east side was breathing it without knowing it was breathing it. Eddie was rigid in the passenger seat by the time I pulled to the curb. I asked him if he was all right. He said he was as all right as he was going to get in proximity to whatever that was, and I noted the way his form was doing the thing it did when the gray space was pushing on him from outside instead of pulling on him from inside, edges soft, the angle of his shoulder relative to the seat back wrong by about a degree. I told him to stay with the car. He looked at me and told me that wasn't going to work. I told him it was going to work until it didn't, and when it didn't, I'd know something I didn't know right now. He didn't argue, and he didn't nod. He just stayed in the passenger seat as I got out and walked the half-block to the chain-link gate. And when I glanced back, he was watching me through the windshield with an expression I didn't particularly want to name. Cora Vass met me at the gate. She was maybe 50, short, wearing a reflective vest over a Carhartt jacket, and she had the specific stillness of a woman who had been running on adrenaline for 8 hours and was now running on whatever came after adrenaline stopped working. She introduced herself, showed me a clipboard with 3 names on it, and asked me to tell her honestly whether I was the kind of help her contact had told her I was. I told her I was some kind of help, and that I wouldn't know what kind until I looked at what they'd found. She walked me to the trench. The site was maybe an acre, mostly torn up. The foundation forms set on the east and west ends and the center still open to the 14-foot depth where the bad thing was. She'd rigged floodlights on stands around the trench. It was the smart call and the useless call at once. The floodlights lit the edges fine. But the trench itself, past about 8 feet down, didn't quite take the light the way a trench should. The bottom of it read as a kind of gray that wasn't the gray of wet clay. I looked at it for a long time. Vass stood next to me and didn't say anything, which was the single most useful thing anyone could have done in that moment. "How deep does it go?" I said. "The trench goes 14. Whatever's at the bottom of it, my equipment stopped being able to measure about 3 hours ago. Sonar reads it as a hole that doesn't have a bottom. Tape measure reads it as 14 feet, and then my 60-foot tape goes slack against nothing." 3 people. Daniel Osei, Miguel Reyes, Tom Cowles. She said the names without looking at the clipboard, which meant she'd already committed them to the part of her memory she kept the important things in. Osei first. Osei walked, and the others walked after. Did any of them say anything? No. That's the part I keep coming back to. Reyes had been talking to me 2 minutes before, about whether we were going to get the foundation poured before the weather turned. Then he set down his clipboard and walked off and went over the edge. I nodded. I asked if she'd had anyone else try to approach it since she'd locked the site down. She said she'd kept everyone at the perimeter because after Cowles she'd figured out that the safe distance was further than she'd initially thought, and she wasn't going to find out where the edge was by sending anybody to look. I told her that was exactly right. I told her I was going to try to approach it. And if I came back, she'd know more than she knew now. And if I didn't come back, she should call Marcus. She wrote Marcus's name on her clipboard and underlined it twice. I went in. The pressure built the closer I got. At the safety line, I could feel it as a weight, at 10 feet as a presence, the sense of being looked at by something that wasn't a thing that had eyes, which is the worst way to be looked at. At 5 feet, it was a pull. Not on my body, a pull on whatever the part of me was that did the work of adjusting. The part that had gotten used to being the most sensitive instrument in whatever room I walked into. That instrument was being pulled toward the trench in the same quiet, unhurried way Osei had walked toward it. In whatever part of my mind was still available, the shape of it came clear. This was how Osei had gone. Not a voice and not a lure. Just the thing under the ground doing what it did. And Osei's instrument being whatever kind of instrument it was. And the pull finding a frequency that worked on him. I was a different frequency, but the pull worked on me too, just differently. I reached for it the way I'd reach for a placement, putting my sense of it out ahead of me, like touching the edge of a cost cluster to find the seams. What I touched wasn't anything with seams, because seams implied that someone had put it together. And this had never been put together. This had always been. It had been in the ground before the foundry, before the city, before the continent had its current shape. Somebody had buried it, or somebody had built over the place where it already was, and now somebody had dug it back up. I tried to get a grip on it. The source pushed back the way an ocean pushes back. Not angry and not aware, just vastly larger than the thing trying to grip it, and that was enough. I lost my footing, my knees went physically. And I lost my footing in the other place at the same time, which was worse. The gray space, usually a kind of echo against the back of my work, wasn't an echo anymore. It was right there, pushing through where the source was pushing on it, and the boundary between me and it was going thin in a way I'd never felt before and didn't have time to understand. The last thing I heard was Eddie's voice, and he was closer than the car, closer than the perimeter. He was right next to me. Or he was inside my head. Or he was both. And his voice said my name exactly once with a flatness that didn't sound like Eddie at all. Then the trench was somewhere else, and I was somewhere else with it. Then nothing. Chapter 3. The Ditch. I came back to myself in a drainage ditch on the south side of the lot, about 30 feet from where I'd gone down. April had my head in her lap. Derek was kneeling on my other side with his hand on my shoulder, which for Derek was the equivalent of a long speech about how worried he'd been. Marcus was standing over the three of us in his overcoat, looking at something behind me I couldn't see from the angle I was at. Eddie was crouched between me and the trench, with his back to me and his arms spread slightly, and he was solid. Not more solid than usual, solid, full stop. The kind of solid where the seam of his jacket was catching the floodlight and throwing a shadow on the dirt, where his boots were pressing into the mud instead of passing through it. April was looking at him, and Derek was looking at him, and Vass was at the perimeter, visible past Eddie's shoulder, looking at him too. I said his name. My voice came out wrong, not slurred, just thin. Like I'd been talking for a long time instead of a short time. Eddie turned his head, not his body, and looked down at me. His face was Eddie's face, and his eyes were Eddie's eyes. But the way he was positioned between me and the direction the pull had come from, that was the position of something that had decided the thing behind it was not going to reach the thing in front of it, and had made that decision at a level that didn't involve asking anybody's permission. "You're back," Eddie said. Good. I asked him how long I'd been out. 14 minutes. He didn't move from his crouch. They found you in the ditch. I was already here. I tried to sit up. April's hand on my shoulder stopped me, firmly enough to make the point that trying again was not an option. She said, in the voice she used when she was being patient about something she was not actually patient about, that I'd been unresponsive for 9 of those 14 minutes, and she was not going to be the one who let me stand up before someone other than me had verified I could stand up. I asked if they had a medic. We have Marcus, Derek said. Marcus says your pulse is fine. Marcus is a consultant, not a medic, April said. Marcus has seen more men pass out from this kind of work than any medic in the state, Marcus said, from above me. His pulse is fine. Let him sit up when he's ready. I was ready in about another minute. April helped me, because she wasn't going to not help me even while making the point that I shouldn't be rushing this. And Derek took my other arm, and between them, they got me upright against the side of the ditch. My hands were wrong, and I found out when I put them down to brace against the dirt. The fine motor control was gone. The small adjustments my fingers usually made without my thinking about them weren't happening. Replaced by a kind of gross fumbling that didn't know where my fingertips were. I looked at my right hand and made a fist, and the fist closed. I tried a pinch between thumb and forefinger, and the pinch didn't quite meet. I told him I couldn't push. Eddie, still in his crouch, said he knew, and I asked how he knew. Because I can feel what you're not doing. He stood up from the crouch. And as he stood, the solidity went back down by a notch, not all the way back to what it had been, but towards something more like the Eddie of the last 3 weeks. He turned to face the trench behind him. It's quieter right now. Whatever you did when you touched it, it's paying attention to something else now. I said that meant me. No. Past you. Through you. I don't know what, exactly. But it's not reaching for you the way it was when you went down. Marcus and Derek got me out of the ditch. April stayed with her hand on my arm longer than she needed to. The way she did when she'd been scared and was now in the part of the cycle where she was angry about having been scared. I told her I was all right. She told me I was on my feet, and that was the only specific claim she was willing to agree with. Vass was waiting at the chain link. She looked at me, then at Eddie, who was walking half a step behind me and to my right, and then back at me. And she didn't say anything about either of us. She said her people had told her I was going to come back with a plan. I told her, yeah, in a few hours, maybe overnight. She nodded. I'll keep the site locked, nobody else in or out. I told her nobody else in or out meant including her. Including me. She turned and walked back toward her trailer. And the cost of what Vass was doing, accepting that the site she was supervisor of was a site she was no longer allowed to supervise, was visible in the set of her shoulders. And I didn't say anything about it because saying anything about it would have made it worse. We got in the Taurus, with Marcus in the passenger seat and Eddie in the back, where he hadn't sat in a year and a half. Derek and April took Derek's truck. I drove with my hands on the wheel and tried not to think about the fact that I could feel the wheel, but couldn't quite feel the fine texture of the wheel, and I drove us to Marcus's shop. Chapter 4. The Old Paper. Marcus's shop was the usual low light. The smell of old paper and newer coffee. The kettle going because the kettle was always going when the 5 of us ended up there after something had gone wrong. Marcus pulled a chair out for me at the table in the back room and told me to sit down before my body made the decision for me. And I sat down. Because Marcus wasn't often that direct, and when he was, you listened. April had my hands in hers within a minute of my sitting down. She was turning them over, looking at the palms, the backs, the fingers, and she wasn't saying anything yet because she was the kind of researcher who didn't say anything until she'd finished looking. Nerve functions there, she said finally. Can you feel me touching you? Yeah. Fine motors scrambled, not absent, just scrambled. She pressed gently on the inside of my wrist. It'll come back. Probably. Exposure like this. The literature, what little literature there is, says it generally resolves in 24 to 72 hours. If it's going to resolve. And if it's not? Then we'll know in 72 hours. She set my hands down gently on the table. Don't use them. Don't try to push anything, and don't even try the small stuff. I nodded. Marcus set a cup of tea in front of me. Tea, not coffee. Because Marcus was running his own quiet operation on the question of what I needed, then sat down across from me and put a folder on the table between us. The folder was old. And not office supply old. The cardstock was the yellow-brown of paper that had been yellow-brown when I was born. I've been thinking about this since the drive, Marcus said. What you described. What April described from the scene. It rings a bell, young man. And the bell has been ringing since about 1962, which is when I last heard one that sounded like it. Derek, who had been standing by the doorway, came to sit down. Eddie was in the chair next to me, at the angle that let him see Marcus and the folder in my face all at once. April stayed where she was, close to my hands. Marcus opened the folder and turned it so we could see. The top page was a photograph, black and white, institutional, the kind of image that came out of a bureau archive before the bureau had the name bureau. Not a trench, exactly, an excavation, clearly not modern, with wooden braces holding the sides back and a team of men standing at the lip in what looked like 40s clothing. At the bottom of the hole, barely visible in the grain of the photograph, was a shape the eye couldn't quite resolve. Marcus tapped the photograph. Pennsylvania, 1947. A coal company broke into something that wasn't coal. 3 men walked in, and 2 came out eventually. The company buried the whole site under 6 feet of slurry and told everyone they'd hit a bad gas pocket. I looked at the photograph. The shape at the bottom of the hole was not a shape I wanted to look at for a long time. What was it? April said. A source. Marcus turned the page to a typed report, single-spaced, yellowed. Which is the word they used for it. The documentation was never filed with the Bureau officially. The Bureau wasn't big yet. Didn't have jurisdiction in that corridor, but it was passed hand to hand among practitioners. And eventually found its way to me through 2 other people by the time I was old enough to read it. He tapped the report. A source is not a placement, young man. Think of the ledger as a floor. A source is a place where the floor has worn through, and what's on the other side is leaking in. It's not something anyone put anywhere, it's something that was always there. What's on the other side of the floor? Derek said. The documentation is not specific, Marcus said, because the people who wrote it did not know. They knew only that the source would take anyone who approached it too directly, and that the taken did not always come back. And when they did come back, they were not always the same people. I thought about Osei and Reyes and Cowles, and about the third one being the one who didn't make it back in the version Marcus was describing, and about what he meant by the same. How did they close it? Eddie said. Marcus looked at Eddie. Marcus had never had any trouble looking at Eddie, but the look he gave him now was one that acknowledged several things at once. He turned another page. This is where it gets interesting, young man. He spread his hand over a drawing on the page, a technical drawing, schematic, precise. It showed a circle divided by a line. And on the line there was a small object that looked something like a bracelet and something like a manacle, with the line passing through it. They closed it by collapsing it inward rather than pushing it out, with 2 practitioners working simultaneously from opposite sides of the membrane, one on the active side and one on the gray space side. April said, "No practitioner can work from the gray space side." "Generally no," Marcus said. "Which is why the mechanic requires an instrument." He tapped the drawing. The documentation calls these bonding devices. Per practitioner, Not interchangeable, bonded to a specific pair, one on the active side, one on the other. With the device in place, the two can work from opposite sides of the source at once. They fold it closed from both directions simultaneously. Where are these devices? Derek said. The documentation, Marcus said, describes them as lost. Nobody said anything for a few seconds, and April was the one who broke it. The site, she said. The dig site. What if the device was with it? That was my next thought, Marcus said. If somebody sealed it once, April said. And the sealing required a device, and the seal failed eventually, which I guess was always going to happen because nothing holds forever. Then the device and the thing are in the same place. They went in together. They went in together. Marcus agreed. And if the excavation disturbed the seal, it may have disturbed the device as well. I looked at my hands on the table. I couldn't feel my fingertips quite right. But I could feel the edge of the table, and I could feel the grain of the wood, and I could feel Eddie next to me without having to look. I told the room we were going back in. You go back in? Marcus corrected. After sunrise, with the rest of us at the perimeter, you do not touch the source, and you look for the device. If the device is there, and if it is what the documentation says it is, we go from there. I asked him what we did if it wasn't there. Then we have a different conversation, Marcus said. But it will be there, young man. I feel it the same way you felt it, only from a distance. There is a shape to this, and I do not think the shape is accidental. Eddie, next to me, said it wasn't accidental either. Nobody asked him how he knew, and we were past that point in the evening. Chapter 5. The Collapse. We went back at 3 in the morning. Vass was still awake. She told me on the phone she would be, and she was. And she opened the gate without comment and walked back to her trailer without asking what we were going to do. Derek took the north corner with a line of sight on the gate. April took the south corner with the tablet Marcus had given her, tracking whatever the gray space was pushing through the ambient field. Marcus stayed at the trailer with Vass, which was as close as he could get without being in the pull. That left me and the trench. Eddie walked with me to the safety line. Stop there, he said when I reached it. I can go further. Not yet. The pull's stronger than it was, and the source is more awake than it was. It knows we're here and it's interested. I stopped at the safety line. The pressure was the same as before, but the quality of it was different, more attentive. Less like standing in front of a storm, and more like standing in front of something that had opened one eye. I walked the perimeter of the trench at a radius of about 15 feet. Not looking with my eyes couldn't see anything useful down there. Not with the way the light wasn't landing, but with the sense that usually mapped placements for me. The sense that had been scrambled enough by the exposure that I wasn't sure it was going to work at all. It worked, though not well. The source drowned out most of what I was trying to read, the way a bonfire drowns out a candle. But I was looking for something specific, and something specific had a shape the source didn't have. I found it on the third pass, about 20 feet around the trench from where I'd gone down the first time, in a clump of loose dirt that had been kicked up and forgotten when the crew cleared out. It was smaller than I expected, about the size of a wristwatch, if the wristwatch had been made by people who didn't think in hours. The metal was dark, not black, not silver. Some third thing the floodlights didn't quite catch, and the surface had a pattern on it that my eyes didn't want to finish following. It was colder than the dirt it was lying in. When I crouched to pick it up, my hands fumbled on the first try, and I had to steady one wrist with the other to get my fingers around it. Eddie, a few feet back, said my name in a tone I'd heard before exactly twice. I told him I knew, and he told me I didn't have to. I told him I knew that too, and neither of us moved, because both of us understood that the conversation wasn't going to change the answer. I picked it up. The moment it was in my hand, it knew me. It had been lying in the dirt for however long it had been lying in the dirt, and the moment my hand closed around it, the pattern on the surface shifted, not visibly, but in whatever register of the world I did my work in, and it oriented the way a compass needle orients when someone it's been waiting for walks into the room. I lifted my right wrist, and the device went to it. It didn't move the way an object moves. It moved the way a decision moves. The device was in my hand. And then it was around my wrist. And the sound it made when it closed was not quite a click, smaller than a click. The sound a thing makes when what it has been deciding about is finally decided. I tried to pull it off. My left hand went around it and I tried to lift it back over my right hand. And my hand didn't do what I wanted it to do. Partly because my fine motor was still wrong, but mostly because the device was not negotiating. It wasn't locked mechanically. It was locked in some way that didn't recognize the question of whether it should be locked. I stood with my left hand on my right wrist and my fingers trying to do something they couldn't. This wasn't the kind of thing you panicked about. It was the kind of thing you accepted and dealt with after. Eddie was closer than he'd been. Still a few feet off, still outside the reach where the source would start pulling on him, but closer. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "No." "Then we have bigger problems to deal with." He was right. I pulled my left hand off my right wrist and turned to look at the trench. The device was warming to my body temperature already, and I could feel, through whatever register it lived in, that Eddie was on the other end of it. Not visible and not audible, just present. The way a voice on the other end of a phone is present without being in the room. I turned on the radio in my coat pocket, and Derek and April were on the same channel. "I have it," I said. "I'm going in." April said, "Go." Derek said nothing, and Derek didn't need to. I crossed the safety line. The pressure came up instantly. But this time it hit the device on my wrist before it hit me. And the device did something, absorbed it, redirected it. I didn't know that let me keep walking. I knelt at the edge of the trench and put my hand on the dirt and felt for the seams of the source the way I'd felt for them the first time. The seams were still there. They were no more available for gripping than they'd been before. But the device was on my wrist, and Eddie was on the other end of the device. And when I reached for the source this time, Eddie reached with me from the other side. I could feel him going down through the gray space toward the place where the source was pushing on the gray space from below, deeper than he usually went. Deeper than I'd known he could go. We met at the source from opposite sides. What we did wasn't pushing. Pushing was for costs and placements, and this was folding. He took one edge of the membrane, and I took the other. And between us we folded the breach closed from both directions at once. I could feel him on the other end of it working. His effort was a weight against my own. The geometry of what he was doing in the gray space pressed against the geometry of what I was doing on this side. It took, I don't know, a lot of minutes. The folding went in stages, each fold making the next easier, until the last fold went quickly. The way a fitted sheet goes the last inch once you've gotten the corners right. The membrane settled, the pressure went, and the gray of the trench bottom came back to being the gray of ordinary wet clay at 3 in the morning. My hand was still on the dirt at the edge of the trench. Eddie was still on the other end of the device. He was very far down, and I felt him starting the long climb back. I waited for him. When he was close enough to the surface that I could feel him on the gray space boundary again, I stood up. My knees shook, but I managed it. I walked back across the safety line. And Derek and April were already coming toward me. And the two of them got under my arms without asking and walked me toward the trailer. Vass met us. She looked at me, and then at my right wrist, and then at the trench. "It's done," I said. "The men. 2 of them are coming back. The third one..." I stopped. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to tell her about the third one. I wasn't sure what there was to tell. Ray-Eyes and Cowles came out of the trench a little after dawn. They climbed the ladder Vass's crew had left against the side and walked out. cold and hungry and confused, and not remembering anything that had happened since yesterday morning. Vass put them in her trailer, gave them coffee, and called their families. Osei did not come back. Vass sat with me in the cab of the Taurus through that last hour. At the end of it, she asked me to tell her honestly whether he was coming back. And I told her honestly that I didn't know. I'd know more in a week, and if I knew more, I'd call her. She nodded and got out and walked to her trailer to start making phone calls nobody ever wants to make. I sat in the Taurus with the engine running and the heater blowing and the device warm on my wrist, and I watched the sun come up over the east side. Next to me, Eddie was quieter than he'd been in a long time. His form was slightly less defined than it had been the day before, not by much, but by enough to notice. I didn't mention it, and he didn't mention it either. I drove home. Chapter 6. The Arrangement. The coffee shop Leland chose was on Crescent, 2 blocks from the old Bureau regional office, 24 hours, bad lighting. Coffee that had been in the pot long enough to develop opinions. I walked in at 11:15 that night with the device on my wrist. My hands still not reliably mine, and 20 hours of no sleep sitting behind my eyes. Leland was in a booth at the back, already there. She'd ordered 2 cups, and one of them was at the seat across from her. A gesture I appreciated the way I appreciated all her gestures, with my guard up. I sat down. Eddie was in the booth behind me, where I'd asked him to be. Out of her direct sight, but close enough to read her. "Thank you for coming," Leland said. I told her she'd known I was coming. "I knew you were going to take the meeting. Coming was still a decision." She studied my face. "You look tired." "It's been a long couple of days," I said. Leland said she'd heard about the East Side, and I told her I was sure she had. She picked up her coffee, sipped it, set it down. "Hargrove is clean. The other 2 from the notebook that were on your side. I'll have handlers on both by Friday, professional, no tracks. You'll get documentation after the fact for your records." That leaves 8 from the original 11 resolved between us, with 3 remaining active. I asked which 3. "I'll tell you in a minute." She folded her hands on the table. "I want to talk about what I want first. Gray space data." "Gray space data," she agreed. "Not all of it, not even most of it, but specific questions. I'll send them to you one at a time, at whatever cadence you can sustain. And you will answer them honestly, or you will tell me you decline to answer. And either answer is an answer I can work with. I am not asking you to be exhaustive. I am asking you to be present." "Why?" "Because something has changed in the gray space. You know it has, and your partner knows it has. And whatever is changing. I am not in a position to observe from where I'm standing. And you are in a position to observe from where you're standing. And I would rather have partial data from a reliable source than complete data from an unreliable one." She paused. "The reliable source being you." I told her that was flattering. "Not intended as flattery," she said. I sat with that for a moment. I didn't pick up my coffee. Because my right hand was still not good with small motor tasks, and I didn't want to do anything in front of her that required them. "You want the 3 cases," I said finally. "I want the 3 cases. I want them addressed before they express. Given what's happened at your end of the city this week, I don't have to explain to you what I mean by before they express." "You don't." "Then we have an arrangement," she said. "In principle. The details I can work out with your team, and I prefer April for case intake because she's efficient and she doesn't waste my time." "April will want to hear that from me first." "Of course she will. That's not a problem. That's why you're here instead of her." I looked at her across the table. She was in her late 40s, put together in a way that had never once been accidental. And she was looking at me with the specific stillness of a person who had just laid out the terms of a deal and was waiting for me to catch up. The deal was done, and we both knew it. "One condition," I said. "Name it." If I tell you I decline to answer a question, you don't follow up through any other channel. Not April, not Derek, not Marcus, and not a third party I haven't met yet. And if I find out you've gone around the decline, we're done. And the next time you want something from me, the price is different. Understood, she said. I appreciate the specificity. It makes it easier to keep agreements. She had not looked at my wrist once since I sat down. That was how I knew she had seen it. Leland did not fail to look at something she hadn't seen. She slid a sheet of paper across the table, 3 names, 3 addresses, and 3 case summaries of 1 or 2 lines each, written in a hand that was not Rhodes's and not the one from the folded note. A third hand, cleaner, newer. The addresses are current as of this morning. The summaries are everything I have. You'll need to build your own intelligence on top of it. The first one is not urgent, but the second one is urgent in a matter of weeks. The third one is urgent in a matter of days. And if I were you, I'd take that one first. I told her understood. Is there anything else you want to ask me before we're done? She said. I thought about it. There were a lot of things I wanted to ask her, most of which I wasn't going to get answers to at this table on this night. I picked one I might. The source on the east side, I said. Did you know it was there? She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. I knew something was in that corridor. I did not know what. I did not know where. And I did not know what it would do when it was disturbed. If I had known any of those things, I would have arranged for you not to be the first practitioner to respond. For reasons of efficiency, not of courtesy. Noted. I will note, she said, that you were the first practitioner to respond, and the site is closed, and my own sources tell me the closure was effective. I will not ask how you did that. At some point in the next few months, I'll ask what you learned while you were doing it. And when I do, you can decline? Noted. She finished her coffee, stood up, put a 20 on the table for both of us, which was unnecessary and deliberate, and walked out of the coffee shop into the Crescent Avenue night without looking back. Eddie came around to the seat across from me, where Leland had been, and settled into it. He said, well? The way he said, well, when there was nothing else to say. And I said, yeah. The way I said, yeah, when he said, well. He asked if I was going to make it home without driving into a mailbox. And I told him probably. Then he told me he was going to editorialize. Just a little that Leland was better at this than I was. And I needed to accept that as a working assumption. I do accept it as a working assumption, I said. Good. Now drive. I drove. The Taurus was quiet on the way home. Eddie was in the passenger seat with his arms crossed, watching the streets slide past. And I was in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel and the device warm on my wrist and the radio playing some late-night jazz program out of the college station. I was more tired than I could remember being. The fine motor in my right hand was starting to come back, the pinch between thumb and forefinger closer to closing than it had been in the morning. About halfway home, the radio changed. Not the program. The station stayed the same. But underneath the jazz, faintly, a drone, thin and patient, the specific frequency that was not the frequency of an ordinary station. I heard it, and Eddie heard it, and Eddie's head came up. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. We listened to it for maybe 10 seconds. And it was just the saxophone again. Eddie looked at me. It's interested, he said. In the device. In the device, or in us, or in what we did tonight. I don't know which one, maybe all 3. I drove. At home, I parked behind the building and sat a minute with the engine off. The device on my wrist had settled to the temperature of my skin, and in the dim light through the windshield it looked almost like an ordinary bracelet, a cuff, something you could wear without anybody asking. Almost. Upstairs, I put the Hargrove file back in the drawer and Leland's sheet on the desk where I'd see it in the morning. I sat down on the couch without taking off my coat, because I didn't have the fine motor yet to manage the buttons. And Eddie sat in the chair across from me, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Then I slept. When I woke up, the device was still there.
Chapter Guild, Stories for Your Mind.